A lonely cowboy witnessed the unthinkable in that dusty Wild West market. Two sisters being auctioned off like cattle, their empty eyes reflecting the merciless midday sun. But something in those faces marked by suffering awakened a long dormant flame in his chest. In a matter of minutes, he would bet everything he had to change the fate of those lost souls. Have you ever wondered how a single moment can redefine the course of 3 lives intertwined by fate? It was a morning like so many others on the endless plains of the American West, where the horizon merged with the sky in a shimmering line of heat. The wind carried the acrid scent of wild sage mixed with the fine dust that danced in lazy swirls. John Smith, known only as Jack among the few who dared call him by name, rode his bay mare along the winding trails leading to the market in Rattlesnake Gulch. At 35, his sun-weathered face told stories his words rarely revealed. Fine. Scars crossed his calloused hands, each a silent testament to battles fought against the unforgiving land, and even more unforgiving men. The town appeared like a mirage on the horizon, its faded wooden buildings rising from the plain like the broken teeth of a sleeping giant. The monthly market drew merchants, ranchers, and all manner of desperate souls seeking business, or simply human company. Jack was no different. He needed supplies for the coming months, salt for preserving meat, ammunition to protect his meager herd from the wolves that prowled. But fate had other plans woven into its invisible thread. The market's hum enveloped him like a wave. Vendors shouted their wares. Iron clanged on the blacksmith's anvil in a hypnotic rhythm. Children darted between adults' legs stealing apples from stalls. It was life in its rawest, most honest form. Jack tied his mare to the worn post and walked among the tents, his grayish-blue eyes observing everything with the caution of one who had learned that vigilance was the difference between life and death in those wild lands. It was then that he saw. In the center of the main square, a small makeshift platform was erected. The auctioneer, a corpulent man named Thomas Miller, known for his lack of scruples and love of easy money, gestured dramatically. But it wasn't horses or cattle being offered. 2 young women stood there, their wrists bound with rough ropes, their worn dresses barely covering the dignity they tried to preserve. The older one couldn't have been more than 23, her hair black as a moonless night falling, in disheveled waves over her shoulders. Her green eyes burned with a contained fury, defying every man who dared to look at her. The younger one, perhaps 16 springs, trembled like a leaf in the wind, her light brown hair forming a protective curtain around her pale face. Jack's stomach churned. He knew this kind of auction. Unpaid debts, ruined families, women sold, to settle obligations or simply because there was no one left to protect them. The law, when it existed in those parts, turned a blind eye. It was the brutal code of the West, where might made right and compassion was a luxury few could afford. Miller bellowed the bids, his hoarse voice echoing across the square. Rough men crowded around, some with intentions Jack preferred not to imagine. He saw the way they looked at the sisters, like predators assessing their prey. Something inside him broke in that moment, like a dam giving way to the pressure of accumulated water. Memories of another woman, another time, another unforgivable failure flooded his mind. Mary, the name still burned like a branding iron on his conscience. His wife dead 5 years because he hadn't been there to protect her when outlaws attacked their previous farm. Guilt had been his constant companion ever since, whispering accusations on lonely nights. Without thinking, moved by an impulse that came from the depths of his wounded soul, Jack raised his hand. His voice cut through the air like the crack of a whip. The amount he offered silenced the crowd. It was everything he had, every penny saved over years of hard labor, selling cattle, breaking wild horses, risking his life on jobs others refused. Miller smiled, his yellowed teeth gleaming under the sun. The hammer fell once, twice, 3 times. Sold. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind whistling between the buildings. Jack walked to the platform, each step weighing like "Edie." He handed the leather pouch with his savings to Miller, who weighed it with obscene satisfaction. The ropes were cut. The sisters faced him, the older one with palpable distrust, the younger with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The first word came from the older one, her voice hoarse from disuse but heavy with strength. Her name was Eleanor, Ellie to the intimates who no longer existed. The younger was Margaret Maggie, who could barely lift her eyes from the dusty ground. Orphans for 6 months, their parents killed by the fever that swept the region like death's scythe, reaping ripe wheat. Their farm taken for debts, they were the creditor's last resort to recoup his investment. The journey back to Jack's farm was an exercise in tense silence. The sisters rode together on a borrowed horse, Ellie keeping Maggie close like a she-wolf protecting her cub. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of blood and gold. The farm appeared as an unlikely refuge, a handful of simple buildings embraced by a fence that suggested boundaries more than it enforced them. The main house was modest, 2 rooms and a porch that creaked under the weight of the years. The barn, crooked but functional, sheltered the few head of cattle Jack had managed to keep alive during the last drought. The well, dug with his own hands, was the pulsing heart of that small kingdom of survival. He showed them the room that would be theirs, the only one besides his own. He had prepared the space in haste before leaving for the market, never imagining he would use it so soon. Ellie examined every corner with eagle eyes, looking for traps, hidden intentions. She found only honest simplicity. A bed large enough for 2, a trunk to store belongings they didn't possess, a window that looked out onto the pasture where the cattle grazed lazily. Maggie touched the patched sheets with trembling fingers, as if she couldn't believe they were real. The first night was a test of wills. Jack prepared a simple meal, beans with bacon and cornbread he had baked that morning. They ate in silence around the rough wooden table, the lantern casting dancing shadows on the walls. It was Maggie who broke the silence, her voice soft as a bird's song at dawn, asking why he had done it. Why spend everything he had on 2 strangers? Jack didn't have a ready answer. How to explain the weight of guilt, the desire for redemption, the visceral need to do something right after so much wrong. He mumbled something about it being the right thing to do, about no one deserving that fate. Ellie scoffed, clearly unconvinced, but didn't press. There was time to discover the true intentions of this strange man who had bought them as if they were goods, but treated them like human beings. Days turned into weeks, establishing a routine that brought structure to the emotional chaos. Jack woke before the sun, tended to the animals, fixed what needed fixing. The sisters, initially reluctant, began to help. Ellie proved to be a tireless worker, her delicate hands hiding surprising strength. She milked cows, fed chickens, even helped repair the fence when a storm knocked part of it down. It was during one of these storms that the first moment of real connection happened. The sky darkened as if night had fallen at midday, black clouds swirling in threatening spirals. The wind howled like 1,000 demons, tearing shingles from the roof. Maggie, terrified by thunder that reminded her of the night her parents died, huddled in a corner trembling. Jack found her like that, silent tears tracing paths through the dust on her face. Without thinking, he knelt beside her, his voice deep but gentle, telling stories of when he was a boy and feared storms too. He told her how his Cherokee grandmother taught him that thunder was just the spirits dancing in the sky, celebrating the arrival of the rain that would feed the earth. Maggie listened with wide eyes, her small hand finding his and squeezing, as if it were an anchor in a stormy sea. Ellie watched from the doorway, something shifting in her gaze. It was no longer just distrust she saw in that man, but layers of pain and kindness intertwined like the roots of an ancient tree. When the storm passed and the sun shone again, washing the world in golden light, she approached him as he fixed the damage to the barn. Her words were simple but heavy with meaning. Thank you for taking care of her, for taking care of us. Time in the West had its own cadence, measured not by clocks but by seasons and survival. Summer arrived with its usual fury, turning the land into an oven and making water worth more than gold. It was then that Jedediah Brown entered their lives like a black cloud on the horizon. A wealthy landowner, Brown had coveted Jack's property for years. especially after rumors of an underground water table began to circulate. Brown appeared on a suffocating afternoon, accompanied by 3 henchmen who looked more like vultures waiting for carrion. His proposal was direct and insulting, offering a pittance for the land or facing the consequences. Jack refused with the same frankness, his hand resting casually but significantly on the butt of his revolver. Brown smiled, a grimace that didn't reach his dead eyes, and left with veiled promises that the conversation wasn't over. The following weeks were tense. Cattle turned up dead, poisoned. Fences were cut during the night. Neighboring wells mysteriously dried up. The community, composed mostly of small farmers struggling for survival, began to murmur. Some blamed Jack for drawing Brown's wrath. Others, braver or perhaps more desperate, offered veiled help. It was during this turbulent period that the second crucial moment between Jack and Ellie happened. One night, after finding 2 more dead calves, Jack sat on the porch, the weight of the world on his shoulders. Ellie appeared silently, 2 steaming mugs of coffee in her hands. They sat side by side, watching the stars that dotted the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She spoke first, her voice soft in the darkness, telling about life before, about the dreams she had before her parents' death destroyed everything. She wanted to be a teacher, to teach children to read and write, to give them the tools to escape the ignorance that trapped so many. Jack listened, truly listened, realizing there was more to this woman than the tough survivor she showed the world. When it was his turn to share, the words came out like water breaking a dam. He spoke about Mary, about the love they shared, about their plans to build a family, about coming home that fateful day and finding only ashes and memories, about the years wandering like a restless spirit, seeking redemption in every sunrise and finding only more guilt. Ellie offered no empty words of comfort. Instead, her hand found his in the darkness, a light but firm touch. Sometimes, she said, the only way to honor the dead is to live for the living. The words hung between them like fireflies, illuminating truths they both needed to hear. The conflict with Brown escalated when he made his boldest move. Using his influence, he managed to get the sheriff, a weak man bought with promises and threats, to question the legality of the sisters' purchase. Sordid insinuations were made. Rumors spread like weeds. Jack's reputation, already precarious from being a loner, suffered. But worse were the looks Ellie and Maggie received when they went to town for supplies. The last straw came when Maggie was cornered by 3 of Brown's men while getting water from the creek. Their intentions were clear in their leering smiles and reaching hands. Maggie's scream echoed through the valley, reaching Ellie, who was working in the vegetable garden. Without hesitation, Ellie grabbed the shotgun Jack kept in the house and ran. The scene she found made her blood boil. Maggie cornered against the rocks, tears streaming as she tried to dodge the encroaching hands. Ellie gave no warning. The first shot whizzed past the nearest man's ear. The second hit the dirt between his feet. The message was clear. The men backed away, cursing and promising this wouldn't stand. When Jack arrived, alerted by the shots, he found the sisters embracing, Maggie sobbing on Ellie's shoulder, who still held the shotgun with steady hands. The fury he saw in Ellie's green eyes mirrored his own. In that moment, something fundamental shifted. They were no longer just wards under his roof. They were family, and family protects its own. Jack's response was calculated. He knew men like Brown, predators who fed on fear. Direct confrontation would only escalate the violence. Instead, he used the one weapon Brown didn't expect: the law. He traveled 2 days to the county seat, where an upright judge still maintained some semblance of justice. With him, he took documents proving his rights to the land, neighbors' testimonies about Brown's harassment, and most importantly, evidence of the wealthy rancher's other illegal activities. During his absence, Ellie took charge of the farm, with a naturalness that surprised them both. She organized the defense, convincing some neighbors to help in exchange for future assistance. At night, she kept watch, the shotgun within reach while Maggie slept. It was on one of those nights that the third important moment happened. Unable to sleep, Ellie wandered through the house when she saw light coming from Jack's room. Curious, she peeked through the slightly open door. On the table, illuminated by the flickering light of the lantern, were objects that told a story of loss. A faded photograph of a smiling woman, a simple wedding ring, letters yellowed by time, the makeshift altar to Mary's memory. The creak of a floorboard gave her away. She expected anger, accusations of invading his privacy. Instead, Jack simply invited her in with a weary gesture. They sat in silence for long minutes before he began to speak. He told stories of Mary, of her laughter that sounded like silver bells, of how she made the best cornbread in the county, of how her eyes would sparkle when she spoke of having children. Ellie listened, finally understanding the depth of the gun Jack carried. When he finished, she shared her own memories of her parents, of her father who played the fiddle on winter nights, of her mother who sewed dresses from the most unlikely scraps and made them look like works of art. Two wounded souls finding solace in shared memories, discovering that pain, when divided, loses some of its sting. Dawn found them still talking, a closeness born not of passion, but of mutual understanding. As the first rays of sun entered the window, Ellie did something unexpected. She picked up Mary's photograph and gently placed it back in its spot. But beside it, she put a small drawing Maggie had made of the farm, all three of them working together, past and present side by side, not competing, but coexisting. Jack's return brought good news and bad. The judge had agreed to examine the case, but Brown had been alerted and was preparing retaliation. The tension on the farm could be cut with a knife. Neighbors who had helped before now kept their distance, fearing the powerful rancher's wrath. Supplies in town suddenly became scarce, vendors claiming shortages when Ellie or Maggie showed. It was Maggie who brought an unexpected solution. During her explorations, she had discovered a hidden cave in the nearby hills. Inside, to everyone's surprise, were ancient paintings, Cherokee symbols that Jack recognized from his grandmother's teachings. More importantly, the cave connected to a series of tunnels that led to a hidden valley with a spring of pure water. The discovery was more than water, it was bargaining power. With access to independent water, they would no longer depend on the wells Brown could sabotage, but keeping the secret required care. They worked at night, creating a disguised irrigation system that seemed to rely on the existing well, but actually drew water from the secret source. The fourth crucial moment came during the harvest festival in town. Jack had insisted they go. Refusing to hide would only give more ammunition to the rumors. Ellie wore the only good dress she had managed to save, a faded blue that highlighted the green of her eyes. Maggie braided wildflowers into her hair, looking almost like the teenager she should have been instead of the hardened survivor she had become. The reception was frosty at first. Glances averted, poorly disguised whispers. But then the music started, fiddles and harmonicas filling the air with melodies that transcended prejudice. It was old Samuel, a war veteran respected by all, who broke the ice. He approached Jack and shook his hand publicly, declaring loud enough for all to hear that a man who protected the helpless deserved respect, not slander. Encouraged, Jack did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He extended his hand to Ellie, a silent invitation to dance. She hesitated, aware of all eyes on them, but then she accepted. The first dance was stiff, two people navigating not just the steps but also the unspoken emotions between them. But as the music flowed, something changed. Their bodies found a natural rhythm. Their eyes met and held, the world around them fading until only the two of them remained. When the music ended, the silence was deafening. Then a solitary round of applause. Maggie, smiling as she hadn't in months. Others joined in, timidly at first, then with more confidence. Not everyone. Brown and his henchmen watched from the shadows with looks that promised trouble, but enough to show that not the whole town was against them. The dance unlocked something between Jack and Ellie. It wasn't love yet, but the possibility of it, fragile as the first sprouts after winter. Small gestures became charged with meaning. He leaving wildflowers on her windowsill, she mending his shirts with extra care, both finding excuses to work side by side. The attack came on a moonless night. Jack woke to the smell of smoke, the barn in flames lighting up the darkness like an infernal beacon. Masked men surrounded the property, torches in hand, voices shouting demands. Brown had finally lost patience with subtle methods. The battle was chaotic. Jack defended the front door, shots echoing in the night. Ellie protected the back window, her aim true, keeping the invaders at bay. Maggie, overcoming her terror, carried ammunition and water to put out the flames that threatened to spread to the house. The turning point came from an unexpected source. The neighbors Ellie had won over, alerted by the glow of the fire, arrived armed and determined. Old Samuel led them, followed by a dozen men and women tired of Brown's tyranny. The tide of battle turned. The henchmen, expecting only token resistance, fled in the face of organized opposition. But victory had its price. Jack had taken a bullet in the shoulder, blood staining his shirt as he kept firing. It was Ellie who reached him when he finally fell, her strong arms holding him while Maggie ran to fetch bandages. As she pressed cloths against the wound, tears mixing with the soot on her face, the words escaped without permission. "Don't leave me. I can't lose you too." The confession hung between them as neighbors put out the last of the flames, and the sheriff, finally forced to act by popular pressure, arrested the henchman who hadn't escaped. Jack, despite the pain, raised his good hand to touch Ellie's face. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. "We still have a farm to run." Jack's recovery was the fifth definitive moment. Confined to bed by the traveling doctor's orders, he found himself cared for by the sisters with a devotion that went beyond gratitude. Maggie read to him, her soft voice narrating stories of distant lands from borrowed books. Ellie changed his bandages, her gentle hands contradicting the strength he knew they possessed. It was during one of these changes, the setting sun casting golden light through the room, that the final barrier fell. Ellie finished tying the new bandage and made to stand up. Jack's hand stopped her, fingers lacing with hers. No words were needed. The kiss was soft, almost hesitant, two wounded hearts daring to hope again. Maggie, peeking through the door, smiled and quietly backed away. Some things, she had learned, needed privacy to bloom, like the desert flowers that waited for rare rain to burst into explosions of color. The love between Jack and Ellie had needed time, trials, and trust to finally emerge. The consequences of the attack were significant. Brown, exposed and humiliated, lost much of his power. The county judge, armed with evidence of the attack and testimonies, not only confirmed Jack's rights to his land, but also investigated the wealthy rancher's other activities. Stolen properties were returned, forged debts annulled. Brown wasn't arrested. Money still bought a certain immunity, but his empire of fear crumbled. With the threat diminished, life on the farm found a new rhythm. The secret spring was revealed to the community, the water shared with neighbors in need. Generosity, Jack had learned, created stronger bonds than fear. The farm prospered, not in material wealth, but in something more valuable: community. Ellie realized her dream in an unexpected way. With more families feeling safe, children needed education. A makeshift school was born in the rebuilt barn, Ellie teaching letters and numbers to eager minds. Maggie, discovering a talent for healing, learned from the traveling doctor, her gentle hands and natural intuition making her a sought-after healer. The wedding came the following spring, when the desert exploded in ephemeral blooms. It was simple, as suited people who had learned that the most valuable things rarely came adorned. Old Samuel officiated, having discovered forgotten ministerial powers. The entire community attended, celebrating not just the union but the victory of hope over despair. Ellie wore a dress she had sewn herself, desert flowers braided into her hair. Jack, uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes but radiant with happiness, could hardly believe the woman beside him. Maggie, bridesmaid and sister of the heart, wept tears of joy that washed away the last traces of sadness from her young eyes. The vows were simple but profound. Jack promised to be the safe harbor in storms, the protector he had failed to be before but swore to be now. Ellie promised to be the strength when he faltered, the light when darkness threatened to engulf him. They both promised to honor the past while building the future, to create a home where love was not just a word, but a daily action. The celebration lasted until the stars dominated the sky. Music flowed like the creek in spring. Simple but plentiful food nourished bodies and souls. Stories were shared, laughter echoed through the valley. And for one night, the Wild West showed its gentle side. Couples danced under the stars. Children ran between tables. Old folks smoked pipes and reminisced about harder times. When they finally retired to the house, now truly home, Jack and Ellie stopped on the porch. The valley stretched before them, bathed in silvery moonlight. In the comfortable silence, they both thought of the journeys that had brought them there. Pain transformed into purpose, loss into love, survival into a full life. Months passed, in laborious contentment. The farm grew, not in size, but in life. More cattle grazed in the fields irrigated by the spring water. Ellie's vegetable garden fed not just them, but neighbors in need. The makeshift school became permanent, with community donations building its own structure. Maggie found her own path to happiness. Thomas, the blacksmith's son, began visiting her with increasingly transparent excuses. Their conversations about medicinal herbs turned into walks through the fields, hands eventually finding each other with the naturalness of the rising sun. The trauma of the past hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined her future. The first great test came with the following summer's drought. Even the secret spring dwindled to a trickle. Crops withered, cattle grew thin, despair hovered like vultures over the community. That was when the true measure of the changes showed itself. Instead of every man for himself, the community united. Water was rationed equitably, food shared, no one left to fend for themselves. Jack led expeditions to find new wells, his knowledge of the land and intuition inherited from his Cherokee grandmother proving invaluable. Ellie organized the distribution of resources, her combination of compassion and practicality, maintaining order when panic threatened. Maggie, with her healing skills, treated the sick, weakened by deprivation. It was during the worst part of the drought that the news arrived. Ellie was pregnant. The revelation came one morning when she fainted while teaching. The doctor, called in haste, smiled as he gave the diagnosis. In the midst of death threatened by drought, life insisted on blooming. Jack received the news, with a mixture of joy and terror. Another life to protect, another chance to fail, or hope whispered to get it right. The community reacted as if the pregnancy were theirs too. Small gifts appeared on the porch. Clothes sewn from scraps, a cradle carved by the old carpenter, herbs to strengthen mother and baby. It was as if the coming baby represented the future everyone was fighting to secure. Proof that life continued, despite adversity. The rain finally came on a September afternoon, first as hesitant drops, then as a cleansing downpour. The entire community came out to dance in the rain, faces lifted to the sky, mouths open to taste the liquid salvation. Jack and Ellie embraced under the deluge, her belly beginning to show the promise she carried. Maggie and Thomas spun like children, the weight of the past months washed away by the celestial water. With the rain came new challenges. Trails turned to mud, making travel impossible. The river dry for so long, filled dangerously fast, threatening nearby properties. But they were good problems, Jack reflected as he helped build dikes. Problems of abundance, not scarcity. The community, strengthened by trials, faced them with renewed vigor. Winter brought its own austere beauty. Snow, rare in those parts, covered the valley like a blanket of purity. Ellie, heavy with advanced pregnancy, moved carefully through the house warmed by the constant fire. Jack had become overprotective, to the point where Ellie threatened to banish him from the house if he asked one more time if she was all right. It was on one of those winter nights, the wind howling outside but everything inside cozy and bright, that the pains began. Maggie took charge with learned calm, sending Thomas to fetch the midwife while she prepared hot water and clean cloths. Jack, the man who had faced outlaws without flinching, paced back and forth like a caged cat. The labor was long, testing everyone's endurance. Ellie, strong as ever, bit down on a piece of leather to stifle the cries that would frighten Jack even more. He stayed by her side, letting her break the bones in his hand if needed, whispering words of encouragement and love. Maggie and the midwife worked with efficiency born of experience, guiding the natural process with minimal interference. The baby's cry at birth was the sweetest sound the house had ever heard. A boy, healthy and strong, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. They named him William, in honor of Ellie's father, but he would be known as Will, a name that carried will and determination in its few letters. Will's arrival changed the house's dynamic once again. Jack discovered reserves of tenderness he hadn't known he possessed, spending hours just watching his son sleep. Ellie balanced motherhood with teaching, often giving lessons with Will strapped to her chest in a sling. Maggie, a devoted aunt, sang lullabies learned from her mother, creating new memories to overlay the painful ones. The farm prospered in the following years. More families settled in the region, attracted by the promise of a fair community and shared water. Ellie's school grew, needing an assistant, which Maggie happily became when she wasn't tending to the sick. Thomas finally worked up the courage to ask for her hand, their wedding another celebration that further united the community. Brown became a distant memory, a reminder of what unchecked greed caused. His former domains were divided among small farmers, the land finally serving many instead of enriching one. Justice, Jack had learned, sometimes came not with violence but with persistence and community unity. 3 years after Will's arrival, Ellie gave birth to a girl. Mary, a name chosen with a silent blessing from the past, was born under a full moon on a clear spring night. Where Will was tempestuous like his father, Mary was serene as still water, observing the world with green eyes that seemed to see beyond the veil of appearances. The family grew not just in number but in connections. Nieces and nephews were born from Maggie and Thomas's marriage. Ellie's students, grown up, would return to visit and show their achievements. The farm became a gathering place, a spot where stories were shared and wisdom passed down. On a particularly memorable afternoon, Jack took Will, then 5 years old, to see the cave with Cherokee paintings. The boy listened in wonder to the stories of the land's ancient inhabitants, about respecting nature and living in harmony. When he asked if he could paint his own stories there, Jack smiled. Someday, when you have stories worth telling. The challenges never ceased completely. Hard winters, scorching summers, pests that threatened crops, illnesses that tested Maggie's skills. But each challenge was faced not by isolated individuals, but by a united community. Jack's farm, once a solitary refuge, had become the pulsing heart of something greater. The West was changing too. Railroads approached, bringing progress and problems. Towns grew where before there had only been desert. Law and order, once vague concepts, gained structure. But in the valley protected by the mountains, change came at the pace chosen by its inhabitants, not imposed from outside. Ellie adapted the school curriculum to prepare the children for the changing world without losing connection to the land. Math was taught by calculating harvests and dividing water. Reading came through local stories and books brought by merchants. History included both major events and the memories of the community's elders. One of the most significant changes came when they discovered that the paintings in the cave were not just art, but a map. Following the symbols, they found an even larger network of caves, with evidence of ancient habitation and, most importantly, silver veins. The discovery could have destroyed the community with greed, but lessons had been learned. The silver was extracted carefully, profits divided equitably, always leaving enough for future generations. With resources from the silver, substantial improvements were made. The school gained a stone building, with a library that would be the envy of larger towns. A small but well-equipped hospital was built, Maggie finally having a proper place to practice the medicine she had learned. Better roads connected the valley to the outside world, facilitating trade but maintaining enough isolation to preserve the unique character of the place. Jack, now with graying hair but still strong, took on the role of informal justice of the peace. His reputation for fairness and practical wisdom meant disputes were brought to him before thinking of distant courts. Sitting on the porch, Will playing at his feet while Mary drew with charcoal, he dispensed advice tempered by experience and compassion. On one of those afternoons, a young couple arrived, the woman clearly having fled an abusive situation. Their story painfully echoed the past of Ellie and Maggie. Without hesitation, the community welcomed them. Work was found, shelter provided, protection guaranteed. The cycle of redemption and hope continued, each act of kindness creating ripples that spread beyond the visible. Years passed like pages turning in a well-loved book. Will grew up strong and just, combining his father's silent strength with his mother's sharp intelligence. Mary became an artist, her paintings capturing the essence of the valley and its people, with talent that transcended age. Both learned not just survival, but a full life, surrounded by a community that daily demonstrated the power of unity. Maggie and Thomas had 4 children, each finding a place in the community tapestry. The eldest followed her mother's medical footsteps. The second became a blacksmith like his father. The younger twins showed an aptitude for innovative farming, introducing techniques that increased productivity without depleting the land. The true test of what they had built came when a railroad corporation tried to force a passage through the valley. Men in suits arrived with maps and veiled legal threats. They found a united community, educated enough to understand contracts, prosperous enough to hire their own lawyers, cohesive enough to resist attempts at division. The legal battle lasted 2 years. During that time, the community showed resilience, learned through decades of challenges. Funds were raised, strategies debated democratically, no one left behind. When victory finally came, preserving the valley while allowing the railroad on an alternative route, it was celebrated not with ostentation, but with quiet gratitude. It was during these celebrations that Jack climbed onto a makeshift box, asking for attention. With Ellie by his side, their children nearby, the community gathered. He spoke from the heart. He recalled the broken man who had arrived in the valley decades earlier, seeking only isolation for his pain. He spoke of the 2 women he had bought to save, but who ended up saving him. He mentioned every family present, every contribution, every act of courage and kindness that transformed barren land into a thriving home. As he finished, he raised a glass of homemade cider in a toast. To the valley that welcomed us, to the people we have become, to the future we built together. The toast was echoed by dozens of voices, each carrying its own story of redemption and hope. Under stars that had witnessed the entire journey, the community celebrated not just a legal victory, but the triumph of the human spirit. The story could end there, in a moment of community triumph. But life, like the river that now flowed constant through the valley, continues its course. New challenges would come, inevitable changes with the new century approaching. But the foundations were solid, built not on stone but on human connections, on daily choices of kindness over cruelty, community over isolation. On a spring morning, decades after that fateful day at the market, Jack and Ellie sat on the same porch, now expanded to accommodate grandchildren who ran through the yard. Their hands, marked by time but still intertwined, told a story of love built day by day, choice by choice. The sun rose over the valley, painting the sky with promises of another day. Ellie turned to her husband, her eyes still carrying the fire he had first noticed so many years before. "It was worth it," she said simply. "Every hard moment, every tear, every struggle. Look at what we built." Jack squeezed her hand, emotion choking his words. Yes, it was. Every second. Maggie approached, now a respected matriarch, a healer whose hands had saved countless lives. Beside her, Thomas, white-haired, but still with a young smile. Together, the 4 watched the valley awaken, hearing the sounds of a thriving life, children laughing on their way to school, the hammer at the forge, the lowing of healthy cattle, the chapel bell Thomas had forged ringing its morning melody. It was a picture of a life not perfect but full, not easy but meaningful. Each person in the valley carried their own story of broken arrival and patient reconstruction. Jack's farm, once a symbol of isolation, now pulsed as the heart of a community that proved daily that hope was not an empty word, but an active choice, renewed with every sunrise. The Wild West of yesteryear was tamed, some said. But there in the valley, among mountains that held ancient secrets and plains that flourished with care, the wildness had not been eliminated, but transformed. The courage needed to survive alone now sustained a community. The strength used to dominate now protected the vulnerable. The determination to conquer now built a shared future. Will, now a grown man with his own family, joined his parents on the porch. Mary arrived shortly after, canvases under her arm, ready to capture the morning light. 4 generations united, by choices made decades before, when a lonely man decided that 2 lives were worth more than all his material wealth. When 2 sisters found the courage to trust again. When a community chose unity over division. The sun completed its ascent, bathing the valley in golden light. Birds sang in the trees that hadn't existed when Jack arrived, planted by community hands and now offering shade and shelter. The river murmured its eternal song, water from the secret spring now flowing openly, nourishing land and people. It was a new day in the valley, like thousands before and thousands to come, each one an opportunity to choose hope over despair, love over fear, community over loneliness, and in every choice, in every small gesture of kindness, in every hand extended to help, the true West revealed itself. Not a land of violence and the law of the strongest, but a place where wounded hearts found healing, where strangers became family, where the impossible happened daily through the extraordinary power of ordinary people choosing to be better than their circumstances. The journey had begun with a stained letter announcing an unlikely auction. It continued now in the laughter of children, in calloused hands working together, in stories shared around campfires, in every sunrise over a valley that proved redemption was not an abstract concept, but a reality lived by those brave enough to seek it. The wind whispered between the buildings, no longer a lonely lament but a song of welcome, because everyone who arrived in the valley came as Jack, Ellie, and Maggie arrived, broken in some way, seeking something they could barely name. And like them, they found not just shelter but home, not just survival but abundant life, not just tolerance but active love that transformed the desert into a garden. This is the true story of the West, not violent conquest but patient building, not solitary heroes but resilient communities, not a happy ending but a hopeful continuation. Every person who chooses to protect instead of exploit, to build instead of destroy, to love instead of fear, writes a new chapter in this eternal narrative. The valley remains witness and participant, reminding all who pass through its trails that miracles happen when wounded hearts dare to hope again. And you, when will you let hope bloom in your desert?